So, let me start. So, normally this first meeting is just a orientation, right? This is sort of how we do things and here's the budget process and whatnot. So, there was conversation at council at the last council meeting with regards that was sort of part of our consolidated fee discussion, which is something that is a precursor to the budget meeting. And it was just sort of questions with regards to, what do the city's revenues look like, right? What are its expenses? And so what we decided to do in this session, normally we do a very, very short sort of financial review as part of the first first official budget meeting. But there's a lot to cover in that meeting. And so what I thought would be helpful, both for council as well for budget committee, is to just do a little bit more of an in-depth sort of financial review. Primarily, one of the things that we'll do that is normally covered at council, but not generally covered with the budget committee, is sort of a review as to the existing year, which will be helpful because many of you were involved, well, all of you were involved with the formation of the existing budget. And so you can sort of see where we are with regards to the budget that was approved, as opposed as when compared to sort of where we are sort of 3/4 of the way into the year. So there is a presentation.
Thank you for jumping right in. I'm not sure we've called the meeting to order. Let's start at the beginning.
I'm not doing that again.
So I think last year our chair was Joe Keenan. He is, I think has changed work and is no longer on this committee. So I believe Gary you were our vice chair last year.
That's what you told me.
Woo, thank you. So I think we need.
Sit in me, I will bring this meeting to order for the, but year 26.
That's great.
27.
And Chris, are we, they're choosing officers at the next official meeting? That's right. All right, so you just called us to order. I think that.
You want to do it
Say
again?
that, and then we just want to do quick introductions to everybody
And
know
not
each
the right
other,
words.
and then we can jump into the presentation, and then.
Mayor Paul,
Anna Cavallari, City Council.
Gary Reef, Budget Committee.
Unable, Budget Committee.
Tina McNerney, budget.
Ben Mitchell, City Council.
Megan Saunders, Budget Committee.
Abigail Elder, City Manager. Haley,
Haley, Ellen, Management Analyst.
you met Chris. And then also in the audience back here.
Carrie Newland, Accounting Manager.
Schmidt, Public Director. City Police. Josh Rogers, Fire Chief.
Who's on, I think, week 12 with us, so very happy that you're here.
Well,
So, and of course, Jen as our city recorders. And I believe online, looks like we've got at least one. Brandon, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Brandon Kammer. I'm on the budget committee.
Excellent. And I believe Councilor Rivera will be joining us also on remote. I don't know if she's on.
there.
Okay,
Hi, everyone. Gladys Rivera, River City Council President. I'll be down there at 6.
great. We'll see if, how long today will go. I'm not sure if we will be meeting at 6. Might wrap this up quickly, so. Okay.
I don't want to figure it out.
I have to excuse myself at 5:30, so.
Okay,
That's fine.
that's great. And this is pretty open and casual.
Jen, how do I share?
I can.
Well, my different pieces, there was a gallery of forward. So just.
I'll look at that.
Oh, really?
No, it's like actually waiting there.
Yeah.
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Man,
Business. It's 4 weeks within my work hours.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
I'll put it down here at 4:30. It's not a problem. Sure. Okay. Now that we're officially meeting.
Thank you. I'm such a stickler.
So, all right, so some background. So going back to at least sort of fiscal 2019, and except for the COVID disruption during fiscal 2021, The city of Hood River has generally operated on an operating surplus, right, at the general fund level, right, revenues greater than expenses. This includes the past concluded fiscal year 24-25, when the city operated at a budget surplus of about $285,000. And that's contributed to the city commencing this fiscal year, the fiscal 2026 year, with an operating reserve of just over $6 million. So that trend seems like it will end at this fiscal year. Current estimates, and we'll walk through this when we walk through the financials, but current estimates is that there'll be an operating deficit of somewhere around $800,000 to $890,000. It's not a surprise. It would generally represent, while it is a deficit, it generally would represent an improvement over the $1.5 million deficit that was approved in the last budget. So I'm going to walk through that, sort of the components, what the last budget was, where we are, this operating expense. We'll look at last year's as well, so just so you can frame that. What has changed, however, is that while last year's budget forecast outlined a forecast where revenues and expenses were roughly balanced, expenses are now in a trajectory where they're going to outpace. Expenses will outpace revenues, and we're seeing that sort of in the sort of 5-year forecast that we'll go over today. So let's see if I can do this. One mouse. I guess it's scroll down, but you're gonna need this.
They're scrolling this.
Yeah, I think, I'll use, you can move them into this window, that it might work.
Sorry. I was just.
Oh, yeah, you can actually take the, you want to take this with you, you can just go up and down the arrows that way. Yeah, I'm gonna put you back.
Okay. So this is the reality for since we're back the other one. This is a little mess.
We can find drag.
Okay.
Okay, not drag. Okay.
There we are.
Is that where you wanna be?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Okay, so this isn't alarming as much as it's just the reality. This is the reality for the city of Hood River, but also for the majority of cities in Oregon. The League of Oregon Cities does a biannual report that is a survey of municipalities across Oregon. Overall, the 2025 survey showed that member cities are facing mounting financial strain as costs continue to rise faster than revenues. So what are the pressures? Right? In general, cities are reporting labor and benefits expense outpacing their revenues. That's wages, health insurance, PERS expense, other benefit expenses. And then escalating infrastructure and regulatory demands. So road repairs, right? Large budget items. For the city of Hood River, right, we've got some significant sewer issues that we're looking at dealing with the next 5 years or in the near term. And then other regulatory requirements such as Buy America, Build America, and other regulatory issues that municipalities deal with that just make these things more expensive. Let's see if we can go to the next one. Right. So what are the causes? Well, fundamentally, revenues are not keeping up with core expenses, right? So the revenue limitations, we've talked at length with regards to the tax constraints, Oregon measures 5 and 50. Other revenues that underperform inflation or do not sort of or are sensitive to economic factors, right? Such as TLT, right? Transit lodging taxes. And other municipalities that are increasingly relying on fee increases and or tax levies, right? So cities increasingly looking to generate revenues that are outside of property taxes, outside of sort of their core revenue base. Why are they doing this? Because the cost of services are outpacing those revenues. Cities are seeing an increase in local service demand, An increase on what is requested from the city by the public. Personnel and benefit costs, as we discussed, and we'll discuss a little bit more, increasing greater than the revenue receipts. And then aging infrastructure and the need for significant capital improvement and investment. And for many municipalities, including ourselves, these are large dollar items. This is good. Oh, no. Okay. So the city of River is better positioned than Menview. That's what it says there in the top. The other thing that you can't read is so the city has strong fiscal policies. Resolution 2020-07, which is in the budget book as an exhibit, is the city's financial policy resolution. It sets the fundamental principles by which the city operates, not just the budget, but looks at its finances. So what are the things that the city has done to better position itself? Obviously, we look to present a balanced budget. The city has strong reserves. So we talked about the operating reserve that the city has at the general fund level. It also has a vehicle reserve that it continues to maintain so that vehicle purchases do not represent a significant burden to the city when they need to be replaced. Debt service reserves that are required by some of the loans that the city has. The city has in the past and has reestablished a PERS reserve that's established to help mitigate some of the PERS expense at the benefit level. So the city is very, very much in front of this. And is very, very well positioned, right? So when we talk about in the long term expenses being greater than revenues, it's really more just a discussion of sort of the reality that a lot of municipalities are facing. The city is very, very well positioned to address this. So it provides the city with the luxury of some time, but the need to address the reality of the landscape, right? And discuss some changes that it may want to explore, if not this budget cycle, then in the future. Okay, so let's go. Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question? Not to get into too much, but in the long term, I mean, obviously, we all know the conflict between those two measures and our financial resources, but at state level, are they really dealing with that at all? Or is it just like measure 5 and 4 years just forever more stuff?
Yeah, I mean,
Something's got to change, right?
yeah, I mean, I think there is an acknowledgement that something has to change. I don't know to what extent there's the political will to do it.
Yeah, treading water until then.
So.
So wait, I don't know. So I don't know what you've done. Glasses.
Yeah, there are some in the middle, yes.
For those of you attending remotely, Chris has distributed a really big spreadsheet, and we will try to send you an electronic copy of that tomorrow for your review. You can also have paper copies of that for you at the next council meeting, or at the next budget meeting to pick up.
Okay, so the format that I've circulated is the format, well, it's similar to the format that is sent to City Council with regards to the quarterly reporting. The changes I've made for purposes of this is a little bit more of a profile of the prior fiscal year. So if you look to the 3 columns on the right, that is the fiscal year 24-25. This is the one that concluded on June 30th of 2025. If you look on the left column there, the 2024-25 budget, you'll see that the city budgeted total revenues of about 10.8 million. And that was against total expenses of about 12.1 million. Of those, 11 million were what I would categorize as departmental expense. So those are the salaries, materials and supplies, capital expense related to the individual departments, fire, police, parks, planning, etc. Then there are the non-departmental expense. These are materials and services that don't necessarily fall to any individual department. When we talk about them in the budget, that's what we refer to as non-departmental, or Fund 190. Then there are two large categories that are the interfund transfers and contingency. In fiscal 24-25, we budgeted $725,000 of interfund transfers. This was $50,000 for safe routes to schools, the building fund subsidy, a $500,000 matching loan for the middle housing income. And I believe that was what it was in that category. And then contingency is exactly what it is, right? Contingency is to be used for over budget items or additional sort of discretionary items that occur throughout the year. So very, very similar to the budget that was approved last year, right? When the budget was approved, even as modified, it was looking at having an operating deficit of about $1.3 million. And so the budget called for the city to start with a reserve of about $5.7 million. Operating expenses or an operating deficit of $1.3 million, and end the year with a operating reserve of $4.4 million. What happened during the year is not uncommon to what happens sort of regularly. Fortunately, revenue is a little bit higher than budget, about $10.9 million. There's no real single one item to point to as to why that occurred. Most of it was in the category of miscellaneous revenues. But it ended about $104,000 in change greater than budget. And then on operating expenses, departmental expense came in about $10.4 million, a savings of $617,000 in change. Most of that was related to employment vacancies. And so positions that were unfilled, that were budgeted but unfilled. Some of it relates to OT, particularly at fire and police, that were unused. And there are some expense savings, but in general, the operating results were about $600,000 below what was budgeted at the departmental level. And then the additional change was the building fund had higher, greater than expected revenues as a result of Mariposa Village and the Lightwell Hotel approvals, right? So more development activity, more revenue at the building department that needed less of a subsidy. And Safe Route for Schools received a grant. So that spending that was budgeted at $50,000 came in lower to be adjusted for the grant. And the loan wasn't funded for the middle housing program because there weren't any applicants. So the expenses that were budgeted at $12.1 million actually came in at 10.6. And so it was originally budgeted as an operating deficit, came in as a small operating surplus, which increased the operating reserve, right? This is not uncommon. The city budget does, because it's an appropriations, right? The appropriations need to be identified before they can be spent. In some cases, spending is not, right? Appropriated spending is not actually spent. And so what's in the budget, is not necessarily sort of completely utilized, right? So again, when we talk about passing the budget with an operating deficit, that in and of itself is not of significant concern, right? It's really more of sort of what do we look for as far as what are the base expenses that are going to be funded and spent. So we move over now to the current fiscal year, going to the first three columns on the sheet. Again, starting at the budget. So this year's budget was spent at revenues were expected about $10.9 million. Sort of a slight increase to the budget, but flat to what was actually received last year. Departmental expenses at $11.3 million, and an all-in expenses of about $12.5 million. So operating an operating reserve of $6 million, $1.5 million in deficit spending, and a $4.5 million sort of ending fund balance. Again, that's what was passed by the budget committee. Large items in that budget, in that sort of interfund and transfer, very, very similar to what we talked about. There's a building fund subsidy, there's the $500,000 matching loan, and there's the Safe Route to Schools. Contingency was a little bit larger because in general, there was just more uncertainty with regards to the budget. So what's happened during the year? So this is through the third quarter of the fiscal year. Based on our estimates, we are estimating about $10.9 million in revenue, right? So right on top of what the revenue estimates are, if a little bit better. And with regards to the expenses, we are still seeing savings at the department level, but slightly less, right? About $225,000 the savings. Again, most of this is related to sort of employment savings or employment vacancies. But some of the difference is that things that were budgeted in the interfund transfers or the contingency are actually getting spent this year. Now, I will preface this by saying that in the interfund transfer was the elective decision to increase to move funds to a PERS reserve, right? So really that just is a movement of cash, right, to another reserve. So some of that spending is actually just creations of reserves. But there was a building fund subsidy. There will be a building fund subsidy this year. There will be the spending on the Safe Routes to Schools. And I do expect that there will be sort of between $200,000 and $225,000 worth of the contingency that has been allocated that will actually be spent. So for this year, starting with an operating reserve of $6 million, I do believe that there will be an operating deficit of about $890,000, leaving about a $5.1 million operating reserve. So again, the budget for fiscal year 2025 and fiscal year 2026, and to a certain extent, the budget that we'll talk about in fiscal year 2027 are all very similar with regards to sort of revenues and expenses and the projections of operating deficits. I think the only difference between fiscal 2025 and fiscal 2026 that we're in currently is that spending was a little bit closer to the budget, right? And so we will start to see this sort of the need for to jump into the reserves at least in some measure to get through this final year, right? It's what the reserves are for. The reserves are very, very healthy. Overall the budget's healthy, but it is the reality of sort of what we're seeing. I guess I'll stop
for the
here.
operating reserve, the percent or.
Yeah, in general, because we also carry similar operating reserves at all of the enterprise fund levels, right? So water, sewer, storm. In general, we target 3 months of operating expenses. And so that should be sort of our, like base reserve, as it relates to, sort of the basic expenses. So I would say for the general fund, anywhere between $2 and $3 million. Are there any other questions before we move on from here?
And when we see the new budget, the beginning number is going to be the budget or the estimate?
So the beginning for the opening fund balance, it would be this estimate. It'll be about $5 million.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see if this works. Locked in now.
I don't know else to do.
I'm running it, please.
Okay. So, general fund revenues, the city is in a little bit of a unique position, in that it has a more diverse source of revenues than many. However, there are 5 primary revenue sources that make about 80% of the city's unrestricted revenue. Property taxes, about 34% of general fund revenues, lodging tax, about 18%, franchise fees, 10%, ambulance billing is an additional 10%, and then parking revenue, which is 8%. So these 5 revenue sources create 80% of the revenues. Property tax obviously is the single largest source. We've talked extensively about that and the impact of measures 5 and 50. We should also discuss the impact of the URA. So the city has 4 urban renewal areas. It is an extremely useful tool with regards to driving development, improvements, providing additional housing. it does help the overall tax rolls increase at a greater than rate than they would without that investment. But to the general fund, it does mean that there is a frozen tax base, right? So this year, we are projecting, and we'll talk about this when we go through the budget, that the waterfront will be returning to the tax rolls. It's a significant boost to the city for this year. It'll increase property taxes about 10% this year and be the single largest factor for the increase in revenues that we're projecting for this year. However, that mitigates, right, in the future. I don't think the next rollover from the URA is until 2035. And the west side, right, which is the new urban renewal area, all the properties that are subject to that frozen tax base. And so, we are not projecting and would not expect that we would see sort of any growth in taxes above, an inflationary increase. It is a function in the near term, that property taxes will probably increase about 3%, sort of, one, because of Measure 5 and 50, right? Two, because a lot of the growth that normally would increase property taxes will accrue to the urban renewal areas, but bolstered by the investment in the urban renewal areas, right? It's a little bit of it's just the nature of that. So great investments on behalf of the city, but long-term investments, right? So that's sort of the biggest factor of property taxes. Transient lodging tax, city's extremely lucky. Having 18% of the revenue coming from transient lodging tax, bolstered also by a preferred split where 75% of the tax revenue comes to the general fund, with 25% of it going to tourism spending, is a significant benefit for the city. We're seeing a little bit of a boost this year as new supplies come on the market with Lightwell, some other small hotel conversions that have not impacted, not driven down sort of rates significantly, has generated gross net revenue. So we're seeing growth there. However, right, sensitive to economic changes. So if there's a downturn in the market, if there's something that impacts travel, something that impacts tourism, right, the city will feel that. So on the upside, generally does keep pace with inflation, great during strong economic times, but a little bit sensitive to just general market fluctuations. Franchise fees. This franchise fees or utility license fees, it's a right-of-way fee or a privilege tax, and it's effectively a tax on the utility provider's gross revenue for the benefit of using the public right-of-ways. Because it's essentially a sales tax, it does generally keep pace with inflation, can be again sensitive to market environments, but because it's utilities, it doesn't fluctuate that much. So generally a strong receipt tied to inflation. For the city, about 90% of the revenue comes from 3 utility tax payers, PacifiCorp, Northwest Natural, and then Hood River Garbage. Those 3 entities are responsible for about 90% of franchise fees. Parking meter fees, the city increased parking meters from $1 to $1.25 in fiscal 24. We actually saw the big bulk of that increase this fiscal year. And so we've seen strong sort of parking revenue, strong increase in parking revenue. A 25% increase in the rate, saw about a 22% increase in revenue. So there's an indication that that the city needs to monitor, that we need to sort of stay on top of what are the meter rates, right? When those need to be increased, should they be increased? What's a reasonable sort of level to look at that? That's again something the city controls that we'll need to look at. And then ambulance fees, very, very strong this year, very, very hard to predict, very, very dependent on Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements. So again, very strong revenue for the city, very, very important for the fire department, but sort of difficult to predict in the long term. So for the most part, we just assume that increases with inflation. Right. So on the revenue forecast, just looking back, the previous high watermark in revenue was fiscal 2023. City revenues were $11.3 million. That was assisted in large part by federal COVID payments. The city received about $870,000 of COVID payments that year. Plus, it was in the middle of sort of a general recovery. So that was the high watermark up until, I believe, our next fiscal year. So fiscal 2027, the budget that we'll talk about, I believe, will be the next time the city reaches 11.3 million. This year, we're expecting about a $10.9 million revenue. And again, the 3.35 million that's projected for next fiscal year is about a 4% increase. The vast majority of that increase coming from the waterfront URA returning to the property tax rules and having a 10% boost in property tax revenues for the next fiscal year. After that, it sort of steady increases.
Chris, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I'm flipping, and you're talking about this stuff, I'm looking at the general fund overview on page 30. And you've got, it has a lot of the stuff that you talked about with the taxes and the increase from the current budget.
Yes.
And that makes sense, but the intergovernmental revenues and the interest earnings are both lower than last year's. And I'm just curious why, what's the cause of the decrease for those two?
Yeah, so intergovernmental revenues are primarily state revenues. League of Oregon Cities presents general guidance with regards to what those should be, what those receipts should be on a per capita basis. And for the most part, those distributions are down. I mean, sort of no surprise. Some of those are to the road fund. But some of the other distributions based on overall liquor receipts are expected to be down. Sort of cigarette tax is lower, right? So a lot of that is state revenue, which is forecast to be lower. Interest is a low interest rate. I think we used the 4.5% interest rate for last fiscal year, and I believe we're using 3.25% for this fiscal year. So
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're in this slide. Sorry. This slide just outlines some of the general assumptions that we're using for the forecast. So we talked about for property taxes, waterfront is a big increase this year. West Side URA, it's $158 million in frozen tax base. So that's sort of the restriction going forward. But in general, again, we're projecting about 3.5% assessed value increase after fiscal 27. That's the assumption going forward. Lodging tax, again, fairly difficult to predict. We're generally those have been flat to slightly up in the last couple of years. For purposes of the projection, we're just assuming a 2% growth rate, but that can be expected to fluctuate. The parking revenue, again, 2% increases. We talked about the 25 cent per hour increase in fiscal 25. 2% increase going forward, again, assumes that at some point in the future, there's an additional increase in parking meter receipts. In general, for all revenues, an increase of 4%, 4.1% this fiscal year, again, because of property tax increase and the West Side URA, but thereafter, just a steady 3% average annual increase in overall revenues. Next slide. Expenses. So this slide is generally all about personnel. 70% of the general fund revenue, the general fund expenses is related to personnel costs. So what are the assumptions we assume moving forward? Wage increases of 3%, benefit expense increases of 9%, relating to all personnel cost increases of 4%.
Benefits mostly PERS, or is that everything?
It's everything. So PERS is the single largest component of that benefit. It's about 16% of all payroll and benefit, all the benefit expense. But health insurance is another significant component in there. This year, as an example, the city is seeing a 14% increase in its health insurance costs. And then PERS projections call for pretty significant contributions at least through fiscal 29. At which point there may be some decrease in that overall contribution rate. That was one of the reasons why the city has funded a PERS reserve this year, is to sort of help supplement that contribution. So there may be some relief with regards to PERS contributions sometime in fiscal 2030. Health insurance costs are sort of unpredictable, but all in all, best estimates are that benefit expenses in general will be about a 9% increase. The other challenge here is, we're assuming wage increases of 3%, but that would assume inflationary increases, right? The challenges that the city has is that, in the past, we've provided real wage growth. And sort of and addressed sort of staffing and employee retention. It's been very, very important to the city, right? So assuming that that's going to continue, one would make the assumption that wages should increase greater than inflation. That would sort of support, support staff retention, and it would provide for real wage growth. For purposes of our forecast, we're sort of assuming 3% wage growth, no additional staffing, and sort of, 9% benefit expense for overall personnel costs of around 4%. The remaining expenses that are assumed in the projections moving forward really assumes things that we're considering sort of, recurring expenses, right? So we've eliminated things that we're calling sort of one-time costs. As it relates to looking at the existing budget, there's a couple $100,000 worth of things that we're just calling one-time costs, right? Whether they're special projects, sort of one-time expenditures, sort of donations, right? Things that are purely discretionary decisions, as well as the city has a policy, as we've talked about, of funding a vehicle reserve and allocating overhead. And so for purposes of the forecast, we've just assumed that those would decrease 10%. One, sort of either extending the life of vehicles that are being sort of assumed being reserved, and then just sort of general admin savings, or things that are in admin that are sort of non-reoccurring. So that assumes sort of 10% reductions in that. Next slide. That said, sort of this is the slide that is in the book, that we discussed, and I want to spend a little bit of time talking about this. Right, so this is revenue expenses, both historically as well as forecasted. The blue line is revenues, the red line is expenses. The green bar is the reserve amount, and the orange line is the reserves as a percentage of operating expenses. So you can see sort of what has happened historically. This goes back to 2018. In general, from the period of 2018-19, fiscal 19 to fiscal 2025, revenues have generally been higher than expenses, and the benefit has been an increasing operating reserve. Commencing with this current fiscal year, fiscal 25-26, and then moving forward, budget year 27, and then over the 5-year time horizon, expenses are sort of just sticky above revenues, right? We're just seeing generally an operating deficit of around $1 million a year throughout the forecast period. And the result would be that over this forecast period, it essentially, right, erodes the existing general fund reserves. Now, again, this is, right, sort of theoretical forecast, but given the assumptions that we've had, like this is sort of this is what looks like is the sort of the future for not just the city of Wood River, right, but a lot of municipalities are seeing this. And so that's sort of the frame in which we have this discussion. So I guess I wanted to leave it here as far as just sort of questions, feedback, right? Things that we should be talking about as we sort of go through the budget over the next 3 meetings.
Guess what's like the, I don't know how to say this, but the macro level thing that's happening that's causing this disparity between revenue and expenses? Is it just like the impacts of measures 5 and 50 are finally like catching up to us 25, 30 years later? Is it just level of expenses are increasing so high that revenues can't keep up? Like, I'm just curious as to what the, larger issue is that's happening here.
From a very simple standpoint, you have a revenue base that generally increases with inflation. Right? It has historically been about 3% increase, right, over time. You have 70% of your operating expenses that are not increasing with inflation, right? That have been increasing at greater than inflation, right? And so eventually those lines cross, right? We used to have, Tina, you'll relate to this, right? When I was in real estate, we used to, if you had operating expenses running at 2% and your revenues ran at 3%, that was a money machine, right? You just sort of revenues increased over expenses. What you have here is the opposite, right? You have sort of a revenue that's generally fixed at inflation, and operating expenses, your largest operating expense is not fixed at inflation. And the components of it, and several components of that you don't control, like PERS and health insurance, right? And sort of the other benefits. And those are increasing at significantly greater than inflation. So a lot of this is things that are just being thrown at the city.
Kristen, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I know that this assumes the city does the current functions we currently do with the number of staff we currently have. This does not have any growth or additional projects or new staffing or other significant resources. This is it. We stay on our current path.
That's correct.
So 2 questions. One is there something that's gonna be discussed as we go through the budget that starts addressing this? Or is this the realities that we're just, it's a tough nut to crack? And secondly, it doesn't seem like your revenue, it's capped pretty much.
Yeah.
Your expenses, you're pretty conservative, but you have some potential that the revenues go down and you have unanticipated increase in your expenses, where if you stress test this, all of a sudden you're having negative operating budget sooner than anticipated.
Yeah.
How do you think about that in terms of your forward view?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, right? I think that part of the reason to present this at this time, right, is to just I would like the budget committee to sort of have this in their mind, right, as we sort of go through the budget. I will circulate an email to the budget committee coming up, which are a number of requests that we're receiving from outside entities for sort of funding considerations, right? So as part of that, it's sort of like, how does the city make those decisions, right? What are the policies that we have? And I think that's really more of where we're at this fiscal year is, right, what are the questions that you have with regards to policy decisions that are being made and how these spending decisions are being made, right? And where should there be additional criteria, right? Or where should the city establish criteria? Are there things that should be amended, restated, or updated to the fiscal plan, right? I think what we're trying to avoid is having the city ever be in a situation where it's needing to make rash decisions, where it's needing to make, sort of cuts at the budget committee level, right? As opposed to budget committee asking the city to think about things, right? That it can come back to it sort of either this budget year or future budget years, right? As far as, hey, we've heard feedback from the budget committee. Here's how we're responding. Here's what we're proposing is sort of different in this budget year, right? So, it's a stark presentation, right? But it's not a war, right? It's really more of what are the questions that we need to address now, as far as how we look at things in the future.
Councilor Rivera's got her hand raised virtually.
Hi, Gladys.
Hi, all. So, Chris, in the beginning, I heard you say that there weren't hires for a couple positions. I heard fire. And what was the other one that you mentioned?
Police.
Fire and police. Okay. So given that Abigail just mentioned, this is what projections are, given that we wouldn't hire additional people. As we think about folks moving out to Hood River, we know the population is going to grow. I want to make sure that I understand that there hasn't been future projections for addition of staff for fire and police. Like what we have saved is, as of now, the most that we'll plan to hire. Am I capturing that correctly?
I mean, at current projections, that's correct.
How many positions are for fire and police?
I can tell you. And Gladys, I don't know if you have your,
Yeah, I
so
do.
that's okay. This is in the budget book on page 9.
Okay.
We do an FTE chart.
Mama's
So
on
you
the
can,
call.
you can see where we are now, sort of regards where we've been historically. Both police and fire have been fairly static for most of the city's operating history within, sort of a couple handful positions. So right now, police is about 16.4 in total FTE. I will note that some of that FTE includes parking and parking enforcement staff, which are categorized under police. And then fire EMS is about 17.8. And that does not include any of the volunteer staff with fire. So Gladys, I mean, I think that, have we addressed this in the past? If you recall, a couple of years ago, the city did add an additional fire personnel position. And it was done so, sort of supported by an initial staffing grant. I mean, again, the things that are not in our forecast as well, right, are potential grant opportunities in the future, right? Potential, things along those lines, right? So the forecast is really meant to sort of paint a picture. It does fall apart, and is expected to fall apart when you talk about things like, sort of projecting sort of position growth, right? Projecting, things along those lines that are outside of just sort of static increases.
Thank you. I know that this is just the first conversation of many around the budget, but as I was looking through this and hearing some of the comments of no additional staff being hired, it just makes me think of housing has been council's top priority for many years. And I think of additional staff to ensure that we have capacity for additional housing moving forward. Thank you.
Yeah, no, understood. Thank you.
First,
Yeah.
how do we compare to other cities? Like when you look at our city FTE per thousand population, I think we're at 8.5. Is that like pretty normal for other places? Like,
Oh, that's a tough one. I would say, now this is a lot of this is anecdotally. I
Sorry,
think a lot of this is anecdotal level. I think that's pretty comparable. I do think that there is an additional challenge the city of Hood River has where the city is a population of 8,500.
yeah,
Right, but it has a functional population of about 20,000.
yeah.
Right, sort of, I would not expect this to be sort of lower on a sort of per capita basis. But the functional population it's serving is significantly greater.
And different cities provide different services, just as one example, the Dalles
Mhm.
does not have a police, fire department. There's a separate district, Mid-Columbia Fire and Rescue, like, that's pretty big difference.
Yeah.
And you extrapolate that out.
Well, and we don't have a school district someplace, so school district, right, it's difficult to ascertain.
Yeah, I guess that's always different. How about like planning and building? Like, how much more growth can we have before we need more people there?
I think the reality is that every department is feeling pressure at the moment. Right, I mean, and Abigail will talk about this, I expect at the next budget committee meeting. The city is operating as I guess at the staffing level, right? The city is operating as budget consciously as it possibly can, right? Every department could use, every department could operate better with additional staffing, right? It's sort of where do we, you know, so the city has made some decisions where it's absolutely needed staff. We've added an HR person, right? It's been unbelievably beneficial to the city. Right? I can't believe we haven't had one before. You know, and so there, you know, there are certainly things the city is doing without that it will need. Right? Now, we won't talk about this much during the budget process. I think we'll be talking about it more at council during the year when appropriate. But the League of Oregon Cities, as I talked about, you know, sort of present this report, which is the survey of cities, which, you know, sort of presents a lot of this, right, across the state of Oregon. Its follow-up was sort of a revenue toolbook, which is, you know, an extensive report, you know, with regards to different opportunities that the city has that individual cities have to increase their revenue base. Some of it are things that the city 100% controls, just as far as sort of how do you look at fees, right? How are you pricing your fees? What are you charging fees on? When are you increasing them, right? Like things along those lines. A lot of things that the city already has implemented. There are a number of items that are voter sort of controlled. You know, sort of when and is it appropriate to go for a, you know, sort of an operating levy, right? Or a specific levy targeted towards a specific initiative, right? Things along those lines. So there are tools that are available. It's a function of what's appropriate, when is it appropriate, what can the city do in and of itself, and what requires, you know, sort of public support.
Thank you.
Early in this evening's talk, you mentioned that we're seeing a greater demand for services just generally. Can you explain or give some examples of that and how that impacts things in terms of, there was an implication that it was impacting the budget in some way, and so I
don't want to speak for police and fire. You know, so let me know if I sort of step out of bounds or if there's things you'd like to articulate better. You know, I think that where we really are seeing things is at sort of, you know, particularly police and fire at that level, right? We are a city that is encouraging tourism, right? It's a city that sort of has a significant increase in population. There's a lot to do here. There's more to do here, right? We're just trying to drive people here. And a lot of that falls upon, right, police and fire with regards to, you know, sort of the services they need to provide. They're certainly getting more busy than less busy. I will also say that particularly with regards to fire, regional demands are probably increasing more than they have in the past. You know, as other, there's like I said, this is not unique to our city, right? And as other cities have issues with their staffing or with their ability to provide services, a lot, you know, sort of lean on Hood River to cover, you know, sort of outside areas. So, and I don't know if that's the case with you as well at police, right? Where
Yeah, they do, yeah.
Right. So there is sort of both the demand at the city level as well as sort of what's happening regionally.
I think when in the next couple meetings, when you hear from each department, they can talk specifically about how service demands have increased for them. So I think we'll see that if it's not necessarily uniform across the board, but we'll see each group has their own unique spike in services.
Thank you.
Sorry, but I gotta use myself.
No, we're good. Thank you.
See you guys next month.
No, the next slide's really an appendix. I think the next thing is not going to be talking about schedule. Abigail, I don't know if there's anything you want to add. What we talked about? No. Okay. All right, great. So if you actually, this is the budget calendar. So next Wednesday, Abigail will deliver the budget message. We'll talk about the internal service funds. So those are the funds that are essentially providing, you know, sort of blanket services to the other departments. So that's the administration department, the fleet and equipment reserve fund, and then compensated absences, and then we'll cover some other miscellaneous restricted funds. Wednesday, the sixth, that is the general fund department presentations, police, fire, planning, the other general fund, and then building department. And then the following Wednesday after that is public works, all public works, including park and engineering. And then obviously sort of the review and approval of the budget. I've handed out the budget books. Please, as you go through this, if there are any questions, feel free to email me. What we'll do and what we've done in the past is we've aggregated comments. I'll submit answers and then send them out to all the budget committee. I encourage as many questions as you have. I expect there will be typos. You can send me those too.
I'm not gonna send you.
No, you are definitely gonna send me those. You're definitely gonna send me those.
Well, we misspelled her name for starters, so that's a good first type.
You forgot Counselor Emeritus.
Oh my god.
No, it says Saunders.
Oh, gosh. All right.
And if I could add to that, Chris, when you submit your questions, and
Oh, yeah.
we love getting them, if you can know the page number that the question refers to, that would be super helpful, and then when we send it back to the whole group, we'll should get.
This is the draft. The other one will be fine.
Because you have a deadline, like, you want those, you can send us them by
No,
Tuesday afternoons.
no, I mean, send me when you have them and I will do my best to answer them by the budget committee, but. Yeah. Great, well, all right, I appreciate everybody taking the time to go through this. It helps me to know that everybody sort of has a good sort of basis framework for this. I appreciate it. And I absolutely appreciate everyone's time and participation in this. I think it's great for me, it's great for the city. And it's really. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
We don't have a vice chair, say, we're adjourned.
Oh, right. What was?